listening to the Ocean Rowing Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Painter, physical therapist and owner of Strong and Empowered Rowing. I help people continue their love of rowing without aches and pains. Along the way, I decided I wanted to row across the Atlantic Ocean. I'm finding it super hard to get in touch with previous ocean rowers and find the answers on how to make this possible. So this podcast is to share my story and what I learn as I get ready for and ultimately cross the Atlantic Ocean. Hear from experts in different areas and from others who have completed ocean rows. So anyone who wants to do this has easy access and we can share our stories with the world.
But really, I think one of the things that's really important to realize is that unlike sailing boats, which are able to travel fast enough to get out of the way of weather systems or get into more positive places in weather systems, pretty much an ocean rowing boat is a cork floating, and it's going to receive whatever weather is going to come at it.
All right, welcome to the Ocean Rowing Podcast. So in this episode, we've got Guin Batten. She was an Olympic rower in Sydney in 2000, and she got silver. And it was amazing talking to her as an ocean rower and somebody who's done crew rowing. So it was really cool to get some insight just on differences and things that are similar and things to focus on. We talked about training plans, foods, of course, because it's always my favorite subject. As well as takeaways from being on the ocean, tips with auto helms. Theirs actually didn't fully break, so learn how they managed it. And yeah, it was really great to chat with her. I'm really excited. We're going to try and get more of her crew on a show, and I will share more about that after the episode, but let's go ahead and get started. I'm really excited. It was an amazing chat, and she took time while she was sick with COVID-19. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate everyone that reaches out and is willing to chat. So thank you, and let's go ahead and get started.
Had some amazing people on. Had some really amazing, really interesting, not your typical, your typical chest banging ocean rowers that get into a lot of the bigger ones. It's really nice. And they're just such really lovely people you've had on so far. So,
thanks.
Great.
Yeah, it's been amazing getting people to be willing to chat and share their stories. It's so fun. I enjoy doing this.
Cool.
Yeah. So I guess where I would start is, so you've rowed in the Olympics, right? Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I think for you, one of my biggest questions is knowing so much about the sport of rowing and then applying it to ocean rowing. How was that shift? Yeah,
I think there's two real bits. I mean, if you listen to, there's so many amazing people, so much advice out there around ocean rowing. But the interesting thing for me is actually being a rower, let's say being a classic rower or a river rower. It brings some benefits, but also brings some challenges to rowing an ocean, because you come with preconceptions, you come with things that you've learned that are innate to that part of the sport that aren't relevant on the ocean. But at the same time, if you go and talk to someone that has never rowed before, their experiences and the things they need to bring are then different. So when I first started out, I talked to lots of amazing people about it, and it was great. But what I really wanted to do was I wanted to learn from rowers, how rowers had approached the ocean rowing. And I rang up some of the guys, and I know quite a few of there's been a couple of internationals, probably about 5 or 6 internationals that have rowed an ocean. And so I reached out to them and really got a feel for what they'd done and the way they'd approached it, because I knew that we started in the same, we had the feet in the same bit of mud, from the outlook, and then they were looking from that point to rowing an ocean. And so it was really helpful doing that. And I would recommend that you talk to if you're a rower and you want to row an ocean, talk to some rowers about the things that work and the things that don't work around rowing ocean. I mean, the classic one is, it took me ages. So give you an example. So, there's some real things which really do matter. Seat to feet height, get your feet as low as you can. Absolutely. That's really always something that you'll bring across in the sport. Make sure that you're getting your weight onto your feet. Because if you get your weight onto your feet as you come up the stroke, you're going to have less weight on your backside. So your backside's not going to be as sore as your, just see what I mean? So there's all the fundamentals that are right, but there's things like, overlap. Overlap has no place in ocean rowing. The reason why overlap has no place in ocean rowing is because your thumbs will not last more than the first day if there is any overlap, because the amount of pounding your knees, shins, and thighs and hip areas get from your fists as the waves grab the end of the oar is massive. So if you had overlap into that mix, it would be pretty horrendous. So I guess some of your viewers won't know what overlap is. So in a riverboat, you would have your left and right hand would be the opposite way to each other. So the oars would cross in the middle part of the stroke, and that usually crosses by about 10 to 15 centimeters, sometimes a little bit more. And in an ocean rowing boat, your oars do not meet as they come through the middle part of the stroke. Does that make sense, Amanda?
Yeah, that is actually what one of my questions was.
Yeah, so there's some real fundamental bits. Good rowing technique's great. I do find that really trying to, you've got to be very asymmetric from left to right anyway. So you've got to be really aware of that. Sometimes you'll miss completely on strokes. Sometimes the speed of the boat will change drastically. So actually there's no point. You might as well kick out 3 or 4 strokes and let the boat speed come back down before you start rowing again. So there's a whole agility into that. But actually the basics of rowing is really important. The separation up the slide, hands, body slide, getting your weight onto your feet, picking the stroke up by lifting your hands into the water rather than putting it in with your back, which of course will exaggerate a back problem. Then when you drive it through, initiating the drive phase with your legs, then opening with your back and your body, and finishing with your arms. So those are the fundamental principles, and they are the same. What's quite interesting is it really helps. We found that in our boats, stroking the boat was often quite good to get the rowers to stroke the boat, because they often they rowed a fuller stroke. They rowed a full length stroke, whereas sometimes the guys that are less experienced, and I'm not necessarily talking about my crew here, but the guys that are less experienced that have been to would tend to do, use a lot more body or a lot more arms in the stroke, which then made it harder for the river rowers to follow them as efficiently. So in the boats, I've often put the river rowers into the stroke seat.
Oh, that's an interesting choice. Yeah, because then they can follow behind you.
Yes, like I said, I must admit the stroke seat is harder. Like anything, it is a harder seat because you're setting the rhythm, and often if the guys aren't picking it up exactly with you, sometimes the boats will feel heavier in there. So there is a need to rotate. As you're going solo, you might not have that issue. You might rotate yourself from rowing position to rowing position for a bit of change. But yeah, it's the agility is really important. That ability to be agile on both sides. And to be agile with different as the boat speed changes, it's super important.
Thank you for mentioning that. No one's kind of talked about that boat speed component to it.
Yeah, I think it was one of the guys. So when you're surfing, as you're coming down a wave, you need to stay in the seat ready to pick the boat speed up when it stalls at the bottom of the wave. But there's no point you actually putting your blades in as you're surfing down the wave.
Right.
See what I mean? And because the boat will be changing speed a lot. So yeah, and yeah, what else is the real differences? I think the seat getting your body weight onto your feet is really important, because it takes the pressure sores off your backside. Mm-hmm. And I often see a lot of people when they're really, really tired in their ocean rowing, they're just sitting full weight on their seat and just rowing up and down, just sliding up and down, pulling. And if you can get that weight, it's no additional energy cost really, other than a little bit more core strength in your core. But if you can get your weight onto your feet, you do lift that. Every stroke, you'll lift the pressure off your backside, and it won't be as bad. What are the other things training wise? So in river rowing, you'd have spent hours and hours at 18. Everything you did was 18 strokes per minute. Well, on the sea, we opted to go for 22 strokes per minute. That's really normal for coastal rowing. So for which is a FISA coastal rowing, which has boats which are more like river boats, but they race offshore. A lot of the work there is at 22, and we did all our training. At 22 strokes per minute in our run up to it. So irrespective who was on which ergometer, and we were doing lots of training on our ergs, we just set out that we were going to do 22 strokes per minute. And that's what we did across the ocean.
Wow. It's a pretty decent pace.
Yeah. It's like anything as an exercise physiologist, you want to train your body at what you want to be heading off into, don't you?
Yeah. Did you do your own training since you have that background?
Yeah, so I wrote the training program for the guys, and we did that, and it went really well. It was, like all of your previous guys you've had on. The real challenge is getting to the start line, and that's where it's almost 2/3 of the effort, I think, is getting to the start line. Well, the actual cross itself is amazing. Crossing is amazing and brilliant. What did we have? We started, in essence, we had about a year from when we opted to go to when we actually went. And I developed, I identified really early, everybody in my crew, so it was a team of 5. We were going the North Atlantic, so we were going New York to Falmouth into the UK. We would be leaving at in June, early June. So as soon as the risk of any icebergs coming down in the Labrador Current had gone, and we had to aim to be complete before the hurricane season started to come up from the Caribbean. So sort of May, and you've got to be finished sort of before August in essence. So we all worked full time, all different ages, all different career backgrounds, really tight on the amount of time we had around our work. And so I wrote a training program which sort of had 3 phases to it, which allowed us to get a lot of this out of the way early. So a lot of it was, building robustness in the body, mental toughness, understanding how the body manages with nutrition, etc. And while we needed the fitness to be high, we knew that in that block period of about the last month, 6 weeks, we were not going to have a lot of time to do training. So therefore, it became really apparent that what we needed to do was a lot of the bulk of that training before that six-week period. So then we could just go into a maintenance period ahead of that time. So we did that, and it worked quite well, and it's quite light on time. And I've worked with a couple of other crews actually who did some of that training or attempted to follow some of that training before that crossing since going forward.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm helping Pete Rhodes with his training program. We have about 8 weeks, so about 2 months at the end. That's a kind of maintenance for has to switch his new route. So a little bit more logistics, like you probably had to send your boat to New York, right?
Yeah, so we sent our boat. We were really fortunate because we were able to borrow other people's boats to train on. We had a period of about 4 weeks. We had about 4 weeks with our boat, but we didn't get on it fully fitted. So we got on it with a bare boat fitting and did a 3-day trip, which was quite eventful because the coastal stuff's quite full on. Actually, it's more difficult doing it around the coast than it is doing it in the ocean, because you've got so much more tides and other ships and bits of land to be hit by, etc. So we literally it aimed to be 5 days. We got blown out because the weather was too strong, and so only able to get out for 3. But we did spend every possible weekend that we could in either in a Rannoch 45, either ours or one that we borrowed, just so that what we were trying to do was get used to rowing in the ocean boat. And that, you can't underestimate as much training as you can get into the actual ocean boat. It's really important. And of course, doing it in the way you would be doing it, that when you're on the ocean.
Yeah.
So the phases we had with our training program was, first one really was to build up really good quality 2-hour on the ergs at 22, and really learning how to build up our pacing of the 2 hours. So, and the idea was that you would do that 2 hours with literally no break, as much as you can. If you were going to drink, you were going to try and drink on the go. You weren't going to stop for food. Really worked hard to try and make sure that we were training what I call cold. So we weren't using lots of sugary supplements during that period, and that we weren't having lots of, isotonic stuff in our drinks, because we knew we didn't have enough space in the boat to carry that type of stuff, or not enough of it to train hot in the way that most Olympic athletes would be training, using a lot more carbohydrate. So we tried to do it with as minimal amount of sugary stuff. And so once we built up to that, we had a 2-hour erg, on isolated erg on that. We then switched to the second phase. So the second phase was building up to 2 hours on with a 2 hours break, and then a 2-hour on. And again, what we were really trying to do was just building that up gradually, so that we were maintaining the work output in that 2 hours.
Yep.
So to begin with, we might do 2 hours, 30-minute rest, and then do 20 minutes. And then gradually that built out to 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 2 hours on. And again, without having lots of sweet, sugary drinks, gels, or anything like that. Just eat a proper meal, try and eat in the middle 2 hours, and then go again. What we were trying to do was to match our first 2 hours with our second 2 hours, and that was considered a success. So most of the training programs I was setting the team was not about how good your score was, it was how consistent your rowing was, or how closely your 2-hour scores matched each other. So it was a much more longer term approach to listening to your body, understanding what your body's doing, making sure that if you do overcook it, why was it that you overcooked it? And actually, or in some cases, often people are a little bit reserved. And that was a good thing, because if your second 2 hours was better than your first 2 hours, you knew that you were more likely to be able to then recover for your third 2 hours when you got out to be able to do that. And then the third bit we did, the third stage of the training, was very much about maintaining that. And when there was an opportunity, and I think only one of my crew managed to do it, Jilly, who's an amazing athlete, to come from canoeing, and she actually did. She did 2 hours. She did a 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 2 hours on set, and actually that gave her an enormous amount of confidence. I must admit, I didn't have the time to do that, because we had so many tasks that we were trying to do in the run up to it. So I managed to repeat a couple of the 2 hours on, 2 hours off, but never, because even 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 2 hours on is a whole day in essence. That's 6 hours of your time that you've got to put aside. And every weekend that when you're prepping, of course, that's critically important for getting the boat across the start line.
Yeah. And I think I read, so on some of the things that I looked up, that did you guys keep the 2 hours on, 2 hours off the entire time?
Yeah, so I think it's a real, it's quite an interesting. I'm really interested in what other crews have done, but we were working very closely with Rannoch, and they were, and a lot of the stuff that we were learning from them, and a lot of the successful boats that Rannoch have supported in the Talisker have done, crew boats, have been 2 hours on, 2 hours off, and we followed that. Worked really well for us. We prepped for it, we trained for it. It allowed us to get that 90 minutes of REM sleep. So, by the time we'd settled down into our routine, I would pretty much get 2 lots of 90 minutes of REM sleep, or 2 lots of 90 minutes of sleep a night, and then cat naps during the day, and that was fine. I wasn't making the world's most exciting, detailed concentration decisions, but that was, we were able to operate really well like that. I was very rarely doing full-blown sleep during the day. I was just sleeping in my 2-hour slots at night when we got used to it.
I don't think I've talked to many people who have kept the 2 hours. I've talked to a lot of people who ended up switching it up in the middle. Like, oh, that didn't quite work. So we went to like a 2-3, So it's fun hearing the different answers for that, especially for the people who want to row not solo.
Yeah, and then we were going for a speed record. So for us, we had to really keep that momentum on. And when we were really trying to push out, because I don't know whether the North Atlantic route is very much about trying to take opportunities from the weather systems as they come through. So there's times when you absolutely need to nail it, and there's times when there's no point. And we put out a parachute anchor 10 times, so 10 times in the time across. Whether it was for 4 hours or whether the longest we ever had it out was for 27 hours. But we would basically, you have what weather is delivered to you. When it's going well, you've got to take every opportunity of it. And when it's going bad, you need to realize, actually, there's no point using huge amounts of energy. Let's put parachute anchor out. Let's back up with some energy and let's go again. And we had to slip into what we used to have an 8-hour block, where we would basically be able to try and keep people on we had 3 oar positions in the Rannoch 45. And if we had an 8 hours where we could keep all 3 completely occupied, bar half an hour. Nice. And so we went on to an accelerated 2 hours, 2 hours off, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, into that process, which was quite hard work. And we knew that if we carried on for too long in that we wouldn't recover enough, that we would start to be picking up real problems in there. But we did that. The most we ever did that was we did 2 8-hour blocks, one after the other, trying to get ahead of some easterly winds that were blowing in, which would have blown us out, which would have stopped our progress. So 2 hours on, 2 hours off was our basic. And when we needed more speed, we would go to less recovery and more rowing.
Gotcha. And you had Molly.
But with 5 of us, that was incredibly complicated. I didn't work that one out, but Alex, who was our mastermind on working out how to do that, she was amazing at doing it.
I'm glad that you said that, because every time people say that they've kept somebody on the oars at the same, like all the time, I'm like, doesn't that mess with your entire system? Like with what order, who's with who? So I'm glad to hear it was complicated, but you figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, the two things that really factored for us was when you've got 3 people rowing, there is no space to go to the toilet or cook. There's only space for rowing. So how can you, so we would have a half an hour break in our 8 hours where we would stop, cook. Well, we'd still keep 2 people on the oars, but we'd have one of the stations free so we could cook and go to the loo. Other than that, if you're really desperate, we go to the loo either in your cabins in Shiwi, or you would do it on the changeover. It'd be damn quick. It'd take a bit of cursing from people. Come on. And then the other thing was, of course, and you've heard a lot of people talk about their auto helms. Because the auto helms are really, really important part of ocean rowing these days. While the foot steering's great, some boats are really well set up for foot steering, so it's excellent. It's it works for them, and I think having a mechanical option is the ultimate way of doing it. But unfortunately, some of the boats, it's quite hard to have a good foot steering mechanism. Now, we didn't have a foot steering mechanism at all in our boat. We were able to hand steer. There was 5 of us, of course, and we also had 3 auto helms on the boat. And what we needed to do was, and with the auto helms, we had Ray Marine auto helms, which are brilliant. They're good at the low speed, but of course they're not used to going at such a low speed that the ocean rowing boats do. And when you go very slowly, they burn out even more. So we never used our auto helm below 1 knot. We would hand steer below 1 knot. And we would also rest it every 4 hours for 15 minutes. So it would have a rest. And when it rested, we were hand steering. Okay, so you can see, so when you start to put your when everything's about not necessarily 2 hours on the deck, it's 2 hours of rowing. What you're trying to do is to make sure that rest period is, inside, if we're trying to keep 3 people on the helm, how do we keep that rest period for the auto helm going inside that, and the 30 minutes for the eating, the cooking up? and so that sort of varied. And I think there's one person who, if you draw it out, would end up doing 3 hours or something, and then have 45 minutes of rest, and then get back on for another hour or something. It was quite, yeah, you had to be really, depending on who you were in the crew, and depending on you got the unlucky slot, but I think you got benefits later on in the 8 hours. The other thing, what we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that so while we were 2 hours on, 2 hours off, you would jump your watch every 5 days. So every 5 days you would get a 4-hour block, and where you would be the person who did all the duties on the boat. So you would be making the water, you'd be sorting the food out, packing all the rubbish away. So you would be the cabin boy or cabin girl once every 5 days, and then you had that, and you had to do that in your 4-hour block, which happened during daytime rather than at night.
That makes sense. You want to be able to see what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
And you guys had Angus Collins doing from the ground. He was helping you from land.
Yeah. So we had Angus was supporting us. We also had Charlie Pitcher, who was supporting us. But really, I think one of the things is really important to realise is that, unlike sailing boats, which are able to travel fast enough to get out of the way of weather systems or get into more positive places in weather systems, pretty much an ocean rowing boat is a cork floating, and it's going to receive whatever weather is going to come at it. So it's more about your weather person or your land person. It's more about telling you what's coming, and if they can predict something far enough ahead, because accuracy is not great either, you might be able to make some form of a move on it. But to be honest, you experience whatever weather systems come your way. And I think the real advantage with your looking at the weather is when to go in the first place. Now, if you're in the Talisker, you go with the race. But if you're doing a solo attempt an independent attempt, you can choose when you go, and you want a really good push off that shore, and that's, for us, we had a good push off the shore. We were 3 days in, and we hit a remnants of a tropical storm, I think, that was coming up, and it was 3 days in, was a pretty soon to get really big weather. We just got into our systems quite nicely, but one of the challenges we had, especially especially when you're on the continental shelf, is when the wave patterns are quite complicated. Because when you're training, one of the hardest things to do is to train for deep ocean, and you're not going to get off far enough offshore to get the waves that you'll get, and so you have, in those first 2-3 days, depending on where you're going and when the big weather hits, that's when you have to learn to steer and cope in the bigger waves. And we ended up getting ourselves too tired. We got very, very tired. We did quite a bit of hand steering because the autohelm couldn't cope with the confused seas. We were steering each other's watches. In essence, we were rowing our own watches and then steering each other's watches. We just got very, very tired in that period. And rather, we didn't want to slow the boat down, but at the same time, we realized that to be safe, we shouldn't be that tired. So we took, I think we took 8 hours, regrouped, and then carried on, which I think was a really safe move. Was something really, we couldn't have got away from doing that, I don't think, because we couldn't have learned how to steer in the UK, because you just don't get waves that big in the UK. It was just making sure that we weren't putting the boat broadside into a wave that would roll it. So we were just, pretty cautious in that way, pushed ourselves quite hard, tried to make the decisions of when to be safe, we never broke an oar, we never rolled, we never capsized. We worked very, very hard on the steering. We managed to we came back with 3 intact auto helms, one of them which was on its last legs, just making an absolute racket. I think we could have abused our equipment more. But the team at Rannoch did say that our boat came back in some of the best conditions they've ever seen a boat come back in. So, hopefully that our crew came back in as good condition as well.
So you had the 3 auto helms and you gave them brakes. So did you just cycle through them? So while one was braking, you put the other one in?
It was easier. We would just give it a 15-minute break.
And then
so we would just hand steer for 15 minutes. So as the crew came on, the crew that had 3 people up, they would steer for 15 minutes at the beginning of their session to give it that 15-minute break, just to let it cool down a bit. And what we didn't do was we didn't use it below 1 knot.
Right. So if you're just using the one constantly, did you even have to touch the other 2?
Right. Well, so what happened, because we did exactly what you say, we didn't touch the other 2, it fused onto the mounting into the boat. So when we were about 10 days out of the UK, and we've been going now for about 30 days, when we went to take out the auto helm that was starting to sound like it was a cow being murdered in the slaughterhouse, it's amazing you can actually sleep through it. When we came to pull it out of the sort of fixing that it should just pop out, just pull it out, it wouldn't come. It had corroded into its mounting, and we physically couldn't get it out. So the only way was to undo the mounting that was fitted the auto helm into the boat. We unscrewed that from the side of the boat. And whatever we did, we couldn't get this mounting out of the auto helm sprocket thing. And we did quite a few sat phones back to Rannoch to see whether or not we could get an idea and a fix on it. And the only thing we could do to change the auto helm, which was the one we'd started with, to our B auto helm, was to actually cut the plastic apart and re-put the bit with the bracket into the new auto helm. So it was a requirement of getting the saws out, screwdrivers. We weren't quite sure whether by cutting it out we'd actually break the second auto helm anyway. And actually we put the old one back on for a day, but it was honestly it sounded so bad it was going to break any minute, that we put it back on for a day, and then on the second day we decided that we were going to absolutely go for it. We sawed the second one up, put the bits in it from the old one into it, and then screwed the mounting back into the side of the boat, and it was fine. So we used the second auto helm, but that was about 10 days out. By about 9 days out, we never opened the third auto helm, which I think we should have done. I think we should have been a bit more gung ho, abused our auto helms a bit more. But at the same time, we didn't know what weather was going to be presented to us at the second half. A lot of what you do in ocean rowing is you are protecting your equipment. You're making sure that your equipment doesn't break. Yeah. I remember lying in the aft deck, and the lovely thing about rowing west to east is that you get this lovely morning sun in the aft cabin. And I remember lying in there and just listening to all the sounds of what's going on, and rather than looking at everything, because you can't look at everything all the time, you can actually learn about what's going wrong and what's going right by the sounds of things. And I used sound a lot to try and work out, was there a problem when the water maker turned on? Was there a problem when people were rowing on deck? Sound is a really important tool that especially a solo rower will use in just listening to what's going on in the boat. Has anything changed? Is anything different? Is there anything that's not quite happening? And that will allow you to, even if you're just slumbering or snoozing, you'll just come out because something sounds wrong. If you think about it on the ocean, you really only, if one thing goes wrong, it's not a problem. If 2 things go wrong, you might be in a difficult situation. But if 3 things go wrong, you're in a life and death situation. And it's when the little things add up that it then gets yourself very, very quickly into survival situation. And I think, with the auto helm, that was our approach, was to try and make sure that we didn't abuse too much of the equipment that we had, so that we had it there if we needed it, and if we were starting to head into a survival situation, rather than just it's gone wrong situation.
That makes sense. And after hearing about all the auto home issues, you definitely want to hold on to them in case it actually really needed help.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I would go for, I would take, if I was going to do it again, I'd take 5. They're bloody expensive. But also what you do need to do is you need to make sure that you've got them all calibrated before you go. So you're not trying to calibrate the geometric or I can't remember the right term for the compass in it. You don't want to be calibrating those compasses out at sea. So we calibrated all ours before we left, so that the minute they were on, they were working. The other thing that we used hugely was the remote control. So we would sit out there and we would just tag up. We didn't link our auto helm with our nav system. We didn't even bother to do that, but we just made sure that we knew what direction we wanted to go on. And it was quite often there was quite a big difference between where the auto helm, what the degrees were on the auto helm versus what the degrees were on the nav system. But we would just work out what gave us the right nav direction, and then we would just go. The other thing you needed to be careful was they do jump quite a lot, so quite often they'll jump off the rudder, and you'll need to pop in and put it back on. We did on one occasion, in fact it was the day we did our really big mileage, actually we hit one of our biggest mileages. We did spend about 2 hours going in the wrong direction, and that's because it had jumped off and we hadn't realized. The sea was very flat and steady, so we were, we hadn't, if it'd been a bit rougher, I think we would have known straight away that it jumped off. So again, just keeping your eyes open. You can hear it. Often we would find the person who was sleeping in the aft cabin would wake up and say it's jumped off because they could hear it working too hard. Mm-hmm. So again, it comes back to that hearing. Use your hearing a lot when you're on the boat to listen out for when things go a bit troublesome.
Thanks. That's great advice, especially the calibration.
For sure. And it does take a while to master that. So definitely, it's not one of those things where when you take the TV out and you put it on without looking at the instructions, and you put it on, you take it out of its box and you put it up and set it up at home. Don't do that. Do read the instructions.
I think most things on the boat need instructions.
Yeah, for sure.
Besides maybe the oar.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You asked an interesting question about the oars, actually. Now, in ocean rowing, there is this. So a lot of people, when you go to, especially when you're not out of rough sea, so especially when you're training in the UK, what you'll do is you'll just let the oars go and they'll run parallel to the boat. So the handles will move out and the blade part of the oar will just move alongside the boat, and they'll just be running quite nicely tucked in, with the blade still on top of the water. Now, quite a few rowers would do that. When we were at sea, we never did that. We brought our oars in for changeovers. So we brought the handles right in across the boat for changeovers. And I know some people would put a bungee around them to keep them there. But we would just hook them under the gunnels. But what we did do, if somebody wasn't rowing at those oars, we always took them out and we always put them in the boat. So one of the things that we did was we always made sure that we took our oars and we put them in the boat when they weren't being used, because one of the things you have is that they are your main means of propulsion, and if you break one of those, you're down one set, etc. And again, it's all about protecting your equipment. And so the great thing about the ocean rowing boats is that they have Mac-on oars, and the reason why they have Mac-on is because you can use them on either side. It doesn't matter if they are, which means that if you break all of your stroke side or bow side oars, then you can just move your other ones across. So there's some real simplicity of trying to make sure that the boat isn't too complex. And protecting them. But definitely don't leave your oars out overnight if you're going to go to sleep. It only takes one rogue wave and you can break an oar.
Yeah.
And it's just not worth the effort in just slipping it out of the rowlocks and popping it inside the boat.
Great advice. Thank you. Are there any other pieces of advice that you want to give? to a future?
Yeah, I think the greatest, I mean, probably a lot of people ask me what my reflection is of rowing across the Atlantic. I think there's sort of three things for me. One of them is that the ocean, I think the big takeaway that you take from rowing an ocean is the oneness of the sea and the privilege of being there, the privilege to see nature so close and so firsthand, to witness, we witnessed, there was a day we witnessed, like, must have gone through one of these megapods of dolphins. As far as the eye could see dolphins. There wasn't a patch of ocean that there wasn't a dolphin diving through and stuff. And that was just such a privilege to see. We saw a whale that came and turned and came and had a little look at us and then went under us. It was amazing to see that. We saw millions and millions of jellyfishes. They were migrating or swarming across the Atlantic, coming towards us from. But as we got closer and closer to Europe, they were getting smaller and smaller. And when we were on the American seaboard, they were pretty big. So we were just wondering where all the turtles were and who needed to eat them. They're probably eating all the plastic. We had so many different varieties of seabirds. The seagulls in the US are much better looking than the seabirds, than the seagulls in the UK. They're a pretty ugly lot. But when we arrived, got closer and closer into the UK, they all seemed to be very much one-eyed. Seagulls. It was just so much privilege, that to be able to see the stars that are so bright, and when the moon comes out, when you missed the moon, when the moon wasn't there, it was definitely, we were not as happy. And when the moon was bright, we were very happy. You didn't need torches and you didn't need when the moon was up because it was so bright. We had occasions where the phosphorescence, you could see the fish swimming because of the phosphorescence. It was just so bright. You could almost see shadows from phosphorescence. It was just, those are remarkable things, and you can only get to see those when you are in a tiny, tiny boat, thousands of. That's the beauty of ocean rowing. I think the other bit for me is the amazingness of the human body and the human mind to be able to do what we do. We were doing 12 hours of rowing spread out over those 24 hours. In our crew, we lost 5 kilograms. We lost a small child. We never realized in weight. Where did that 50 kilograms of weight go? We didn't realize how important nutrition was in the cold side of things, because a lot of all our calculations had taken place from the Talisker, from the guys doing what we call the holiday route. So when you're rowing in the colder latitudes, you definitely wish you were rowing in the holiday route, which is people go on holidays to the Canaries and they go on holiday to the Caribbean. So we dubbed it the holiday route. So apologies to everyone that races that route.
I like it.
We also were day 3 when I think someone goes, when do you think the naked rowing is going to start? And we looked at each other and we hadn't taken our full oil skins and all the clothes we brought with us off for 3 days, and we're going, I'm not rowing naked. There was the real differences between. What was amazing was, my colleagues in my boat, my crewmates, Mary, Jilly, Alex, and little Molly, who was 19. She's not little, by the way, but she was young. They were amazing, but all uniquely different. And a lot of people will ask, why do you not get annoyed with each other and angry with each other? And I would say the biggest thing you learn from ocean rowing is tolerance. A, you're too tired to be intolerant, and B, you just take one look at the people you're rowing with and you can see how knackered they are, and it doesn't seem quite as important to be pissed off by their foibles. So there's a real oneness in it, and a real togetherness that allows you to get each other through the night, on your night watches and through the scary patches. But I think the really interesting thing is there's a whole load of stuff which is still not understood by science around. And I'm not talking about people who do 8 hours of exercise and then go to sleep for 12 hours exercise and then go to sleep for 12 hours. I'm talking about people who are doing 2 hours on, 2 hours off type exercise, and how that changes the chemistry of the way we burn energy. What was really interesting, it was the ease at which we were able to take our bodies into the rowing. 2 hours on, 2 hours off wasn't an issue. Didn't have many issues with that. Nobody ever missed a 2 hour session at the beginning, other than when Jilly was seasick, and she was out of the count until she managed to get her sea legs. But nobody missed it. They all came on deck. We would occasionally be very wobbly towards the end of our sessions. But what was interesting was when we came back to land. So I think the body's much better at adapting into the exercise than adapting from exercise into sedentary life. So when I came back, I lost my vision. I started to lose my vision. I went very, very, very problematic with my vision. It took 6 weeks to come back, but it was based on the fact that I had not needed to produce any insulin while I was at sea. And then, of course, when I came back, I was not exercising, so therefore, and I wasn't producing any insulin. So in essence, I was getting the challenges with sight based on what a diabetic would be having.
Wow.
As I came back. So there's some real nuances. It's not written up. I mean, as an exercise physiologist, I really know my stuff around sport, but there's a whole load of physiology that is not linked with, which is not linked or recorded. So a lot of the places that I went to look for the research there was a really good piece of research that took place in New York during the war, and it was around starvation. And that are very, very interesting. And that a lot of the stuff that we were thinking about powering the brain and the use of ketones and the ability of the body to adapt fat rather than carbohydrate to exercise is really good in those bits of research that took place during the war. The other bit was the responses that we were getting back when we got back to land was similar to anorexic refeeding. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I mean? So when you come back, so as the body tries to adapt back to sedentary behavior. The other great bit, none of us, well, Jilly doesn't drink, so she didn't get the benefit of it, but we didn't get a hangover or we could drink as much as we liked for about 2 weeks after we got back. And I've spoken to a lot of doctors and medics around that. There is no answer. There's an answer to everything I experienced, but that's the one thing we haven't got an answer to around the degradation of alcohol. But I think that's why ocean rowers drink a lot when they get back, because they can. And they don't get a hangover, so they can wake up the next morning and start again. So yeah, it's amazing how much alcohol you can cope with when you get back. You know, I sort of just coming back, it's as if you were leaving New York as a petrol engine and you arrive in Falmouth for us as a diesel. Your body has completely changed its chemistry. So in the way, so I don't know whether you know, so you've heard of hangry, you know, when you're angry because you're hungry.
Yeah.
And so what that's caused by the fact that you've got low blood sugar level and your body is basically saying, I need some blood sugar levels. Mm-hmm. And so what your body, if it can't have sugar, if you can't go and eat something, your body will then start to degrade protein. So therefore, I don't know whether you know, but well, you're from rowing. So rowers really struggle to put on muscle mass because they do so much endurance training. So because the body is able to get blood sugar level by degrading protein, so it can raid your muscles to feed your brain with carbohydrates, your brain can function. Now, as you get more and more hungry, and as you get more and more starved, I guess, is if you look at the research from New York, what happens is the body's able to, there's one muscle it has to protect. And and that muscle is your heart. Yeah. And so therefore the ability to degrade protein is no longer a survival mechanism. So the body goes into what's called a sort of a glucose flux thing. And basically what it does is your body is able to start to power, your brain is able to power itself up by using ketones, the breakdown of fat. And at that point, what your body's doing is your body is utilizing much, much more fat in the energy production. Okay, so therefore you're now a pure lean ocean rowing machine. Once you've got to that point, you are absolutely, you don't bonk as much, you're much more level. There's so much more, and this comes back to the training we were trying to do. We were desperately trying to make sure that we were training by eating normally rather than by putting lots of sugar into our diet and having lots of sugary drinks.
Yeah.
Trying to make sure that can we get this real ability to use the fat that is so much more beneficial into endurance exercise than carbohydrate. And I fundamentally believe that the more science that we understand about that, the better. And I while we lost 50 kilos, I do know of ocean rowers that have managed to cross without losing any weight. And I do believe it's possible to cross without losing weight. The reason why we lost so much weight was we didn't take enough food. We calculated on, well, we took enough food, but we calculated on 4,000 calories. And I think we needed around, I was losing 2,000 calories a day from the minute we left New York. And I reckon that I needed 6,000 calories. We just totally underestimated the amount of calories that we were. And the reason why I believe that we underestimated it was that we thought that women needed less calories. I don't now believe that's true. I think irrespective of whether you're a guy or a girl, you need the same amount of calories. I think the next one is that on the colder routes, or when it is colder, you do need to eat a lot more.
Interesting.
Because you're trying to maintain body heat.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot more science around the food. I mean, I loved the food that we had, and we were not eating enough. Now we were going for a record that was 89 days. We only managed to put 60 days of food on our boat, and we had to eat our way into the cabin because we're 5 of us in a 4-man boat. There's not much space. And so we were pretty committed to breaking the women's record of 89 days, which we did.
49, right?
Yeah, 49 days. Yeah.
Awesome.
And as we got closer and closer, the our ability we could eat more and more because we knew that we were going to get there. We weren't going to get suddenly hit into a dead period. So we did eat lots of food in the last 3 or 4 days, which was lovely.
Because you have it.
Yeah.
So my favorite question is, what was your favorite food that you had?
Oh, favorite food. Okay, favorite food was definitely the snack packs. I can't, the ability to get that sugar and get that craving of, snack packs in there. Just absolutely, just take as many as you can, as many as your boat will allow. Take loads and loads. I think we had 2.5 chocolate bars are equivalent in sweets per day. So I'd definitely go for loads of those. We used Mountain House dried food, which was brilliant, really, really nice. And a lot of your guys have said, take sauces and things like that. Absolutely. We took a big thing of olive oil and put stuffed full of chilies, and we just poured that onto our food. Unfortunately, we lost that in a Force 11 storm because I didn't tie it on. So we were gutted after that had gone. But we didn't then started using a big bottle of Tabascos that we had with us. What I would say is that protein supplements just gave us diarrhea, and we honestly didn't eat those. And in fact, they went off and smelt like a dog had pooed in the boat. So don't take protein powder. But what we did use was meal replacement. It's really expensive, but if you can get hold of it, it's really good. And we would just put that into, it mainly comes in vanilla and chocolate flavor, and we would put that into our pudding. So we had puddings. So we had, dehydrated puddings, and we would just put, scoops of that in to make it last. And that was pretty important. I didn't know
that dehydrated pudding was a thing.
Yeah. So all our Mountain House stuff came from the US because it's quite hard to import foods into the US. So we had all the American flavors as opposed to the English flavors. The English flavors are more sort of Italian and Indian, curries and stuff like that. Whereas there was
Yeah, so we had lots of American flavors, which were good. And so we had American puddings and American breakfasts. So skillet, never heard of a skillet before, but there you go. Skillet breakfast. So it was good.
Nice. I don't want to take up any of your time, but thank you so much for sharing all of your information. I would love to hear your stories, though, at some point, if you'd be willing to share at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Two things really from me, Amanda. I just want to wish you all the best. There's no such thing as a typical ocean rower, and everybody's different in their own way. That one thing that holds everybody together is their passion and their dream to get out there and row the ocean. So I think it's really exciting what you're doing. It's really remarkable, and anything I can do, or if I know anyone that could help you, just give us a shout. I would love to, as you say, I'd love to do more of a story rather than advice.
Yeah.
And there is a small video there's a 3-minute video that we've montaged. I have actually done an hour's documentary. But unfortunately I've put loads of really cool music on it, the music that we used when we rowed across. So I can't put it out on YouTube yet because it'll just be blocked.
Gotcha.
There is that documentary, but I'm really happy to talk it through. And if, for example, later on when you're looking for people to come and you want to get some of the other guys in the crew on to talk it through, I'm sure I could get some of those guys. They are amazing. I mean, just, the depth of how you, the friendships and the depths of how you know people from rowing an ocean is really cool. So if you wanted to get a group on, really keen, would be happy to do that if we can work that out with Zoom.
I would love to do that.
Cool. Good.
Yes,
I can't guarantee I'll get all of them because they're all incredibly busy. But if I can get one or two of them, because I'm sure we'll all disagree on things, so it'd be great.
That'd be amazing. So I did a group with Girls Gone Wild. Not Girls Gone Wild. Girls Gone something. They're about to take off.
Oh wow! Yep.
They're supposed to do the crossing from San Francisco to Hawaii coming up in May, but I don't know if that's happening anymore. But I had them on here, and it was really fun to have a group and hear the different perspectives. So I would definitely be up for that.
Great. So how many would work?
We can actually do as many as we get. So I can have the upgraded Zoom, so we won't get cut off.
Brilliant. Great. So what I'll do is if you when you have give an indication of when you might be up for that, I'll try and see whether I can get the posse together.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. And please, if there's anything I can do for you, please let me know.
Keep doing what you're doing. It's great. All right, Amanda.
All right. Have a great day.
Cheers. Bye.
I feel better.
Thank you.
All right, I hope you liked that episode. I had a blast recording it and chatting with her. So yeah, that is basically where we're at. I'm really excited. If you heard at the end, I'm really excited to have her and her team, anybody that we can get on here and talk a little bit more about stories. So I think it'll be great to be able to have people's stories, have this for people that have already rowed an ocean, and just to keep them engaged and keep them wanting to listen and hearing stories from each other who they might not be able to chat with. So I'm really excited to kind of do that shift a little bit. And since I like to keep my episodes about an hour-ish, I want to kind of maybe split that up into two, but I also know that getting people to chat that much is kind of hard. So I'm really excited that she might be willing to come on again with her crewmates, and we will keep you posted on that episode. If you liked it, hit that subscribe button, and in about 2 weeks, we will have another update episode that'll be short and quick, and I hope you guys have an amazing evening and day, and yeah,